After the car accident wiped his memory, the billionaire's fortune became a weapon for his partners. His lawyers moved to declare him incompetent, but the only person who could prove who he really was a 3-year-old girl who didn't even know his name. This is Elias Thorne. Before the crash, he was the visionary founder of Ether, a tech empire worth $4.3 billion. Now he's a blank slate in a hospital bed, and a court will decide in 72 hours if he's fit to control his own life. Everyone in that room has a motive, except for the little girl who just wants her plastic ring back. The crash happened on a Thursday night. Rain slicked the roads. Elias Thorne was driving back from the airport alone, a detail his partners would later call reckless in their filings. A delivery van ran a stop sign. The impact was on the driver's side. First responders found him conscious but confused, repeatedly asking what year it was. That single question marked the beginning of a medical and legal nightmare. At the hospital, the diagnosis was severe post-traumatic amnesia. His memory wasn't just fragmented, it was erased, a clean slate going back nearly 5 years. He knew basic facts, could tie his shoes, but he didn't remember building Ether. He didn't recognize his own penthouse in photos. He didn't remember his former fiancée who had left him 2 years prior. The neurologist explained the timeline. With an injury this severe, the period of amnesia could last weeks, even months. And in the immediate window for recovery, the brain is supremely vulnerable, highly suggestible, rebuilding its map of the world from whatever input it receives. Whoever controlled that input controlled the man. Enter the partners, Robert Vance and Daniel Kim. Vance had been the money, the smooth-talking venture capitalist who funded Ether's first round. Kim had been the operations guru, the one who scaled the vision. Together with Elias, they were the 3-person board, but for the last 18 months, there had been a rift. Elias wanted to take the company in a new direction, into secure data storage for healthcare, a move that would be costly and slow. Vance and Kim wanted to sell, to cash out to a larger rival for a figure that would make each of them personally wealthy beyond reason. Elias had refused, the vote was stalled, and then the crash. They visited him in the hospital on the second day. Vance brought a contract. It was framed as a temporary stewardship agreement, a standard document to keep the company running during his incapacity. It would have given them joint signing authority on all major decisions. Elias, his head bandaged, his eyes glazed from medication, looked at the paper. He asked the nurse for a pen, but then he paused. He looked at Vance and said, I don't know if I trust you. He said it like a child stating a simple fact. Vance smiled, took the contract back and said, Of course, Elias, we just want to help. They left the room. That moment of instinctive distrust was the only thing that saved him in those first 48 hours. Because the next day the lawyers arrived, not his personal counsel, but the firm representing Ether's board. They filed a petition with the court for a temporary conservatorship. The argument was straightforward. The CEO of a $4.3 billion company lacked the mental capacity to make informed decisions, thereby threatening the stability of the company, its employees, and its shareholders. A hearing was set for 72 hours later. The petition included affidavits from Vance and Kim describing his confusion and paranoia. It included a report from a hired neuropsychologist who had observed him for 30 minutes and noted his disorientation to time and place. The system, once triggered, was designed to move fast. This is where the housekeeper Maria enters the story. She had cleaned Elias' penthouse twice a week for 3 years. She was a ghost in his life, a reliable, quiet presence. She knew his routines, the abandoned coffee cups left by the east window, the specific way he stacked his books, the fact that he hated the sound of the vacuum, so she always did that room last. When news of the accident broke, she called the hospital. Not to speak to him, but to offer to water his plants, to check on the apartment. The head of his security, a man still loyal to Elias, gave her access. She started coming daily, maintaining the space as if he would walk in any moment. She brought her 3-year-old daughter, Chloe, because her childcare had fallen apart. She would set Chloe up in the living room with toys while she worked. One afternoon, a week after the crash, Maria was called to the hospital by a social worker. With no immediate family present, they needed someone to bring personal items, clothes, toiletries. Maria packed a bag from his home. Chloe, clutching a plastic toy ring from a cereal box, insisted on coming. The first time Chloe saw Elias, he was propped up in his hospital bed, staring at a blank wall. The room was filled with the quiet hum of machines and the low murmur of two lawyers arguing in the corner about fiduciary duty. Chloe, unimpressed by the adults, waddled over to the bed. She held up her plastic ring. "This is for you," she announced. Elias looked down at her. He didn't speak. Then slowly he held out his hand. She placed the ring in his palm and closed his fingers around it. "You keep it," she said, and then ran back to her mother. Elias looked at the ring, then at the lawyers, then back at the ring. He slid it onto his pinky finger. He didn't take it off. Maria began visiting regularly after that, under the guise of dropping off clean laundry or mail. She saw the parade of suits, the pressured conversations, the way Elias would shut down when too many people talked at once. She saw Vance lean in once and say, "You do remember our handshake deal on the merger, don't you, Eli?" Elias had just blinked, his expression blank. Vance patted his shoulder and walked out, a smirk playing on his lips. Maria said nothing. But she started staying longer. She would sit in the chair by the window, folding laundry, a silent, neutral presence. Chloe would play on the floor. It became a bizarre, quiet routine in the middle of the storm. Then the first flash. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Maria was sorting socks. Chloe was trying to stack blocks on the rolling hospital tray. She knocked them over and they clattered loudly. Elias, who had been dozing, jerked awake. He looked at the scattered blocks, then at Chloe's frustrated face, and he said very quietly, "The tower falls, but the builder remains." He said it like a reflex. Then he frowned as if startled by his own words. Maria froze. She knew that phrase. It was the unofficial motto of Ether's original engineering team, printed on old t-shirts. It wasn't something you'd read in a news article. It was an internal slogan. How did he remember that when he couldn't remember his own address? She didn't mention it to the doctors. She didn't mention it to the lawyers. She filed it away. But she started paying closer attention. She noticed he was calmer, more focused when Chloe was in the room. The lawyer's jargon would make him tense up, but Chloe's simple, repetitive stories about her stuffed cat seemed to ground him. Neurology research would later explain this. The brain under severe stress retreats. Complex, threatening information is blocked. But simple, familiar, emotional cues, like a child's voice, can sometimes bypass the blockage, accessing deeper layers of memory. The day before the court hearing, the pressure reached its peak. Vance and Kim held a press conference, announcing proactive measures to ensure leadership continuity at Ether. Their proposed interim CEO was a close associate of Vance. The stock price jumped on the news. In his hospital room, Elias' court-appointed advocate, a weary public defender named Anya, laid out the grim reality. "The judge will likely grant the conservatorship tomorrow. Their evidence is strong. Your medical state is undeniable. Once they control your assets and your voting shares, the sale of the company will proceed within weeks." Elias stared out the window. He was wearing a hospital gown, the dark blazer Maria had brought draped over his shoulders. The plastic ring was still on his finger. "What if I could remember?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Anya sighed. "Do you remember anything substantial about the company disputes?" He was silent. He didn't. Later that evening, Maria and Chloe came for what she thought might be the last time. The hearing was at 9 a.m. She helped him organize the few personal items on his bedside table. Chloe, bored, was poking through the drawer of the table. She pulled out a small, laminated menu card for the hospital cafeteria. On the back, someone had drawn a crude, smiling sun. Chloe showed it to Elias. "You drawed this," she stated. Elias took it. He studied the drawing. His breath hitched. "No, I didn't," he whispered, but his hand was shaking. "Yes, you did," Chloe insisted, with a toddler's absolute certainty. "When the lady with the needle came, you said it was for me, so I wouldn't be scared." Maria looked from her daughter to Elias. She had never seen this drawing before. It must have happened during one of the many procedures, a moment she'd missed. Elias' eyes were wide, fixed on the childish son. A vein pulsed in his temple. He wasn't just seeing a drawing. He was feeling something. The memory of doing it, the reason why. He looked up at Maria, a terrifying vulnerability in his eyes. She's the only one who talks to me like I'm still me," he said. And in that moment, Maria made a decision. She knew about the hearing. She knew about the ring. She knew about the sun drawing. and she knew something the lawyers and the partners had completely overlooked. She leaned forward and spoke the words that would change everything. "Then tomorrow, we don't play their game, we play hers." Maria's plan was absurd on its face. She wasn't a lawyer or a doctor. She was a housekeeper with a high school diploma and a maxed-out credit card. But she understood the one thing the experts had missed: the brain's back door. She stayed up that night, reading medical articles on her phone about post-traumatic amnesia. She learned that complex, stressful questioning could shut memory retrieval down, but simple, repetitive, emotional cues from before the injury could sometimes slip through. Chloe was the only person in Elia's current life who had interacted with the before version of him without agenda, even if just for a few minutes a day, for years. She was a living, breathing link to his old routines. Her words, her toys, even the serial ring, they were potential keys. Maria's plan was to use the hearing not to argue with documents, but to stage a memory, to force a moment so specific, so tied to Chloe's world, that it might trigger something verifiable. She called Anya, the public defender. At 5 a.m. Anya listened, skeptical. "You want to bring a toddler into a competency hearing as a cognitive tool." "I want to bring in the only witness who's been honest with him," Maria said. "The judge needs to see the difference between how he reacts under their pressure and how he reacts with her." Anya was quiet, then she said, "It's unorthodox, but the standard procedure is failing. We have nothing to lose." At 8:30 a.m., they gathered in a conference room next to the courtroom. Elias was in a suit, looking pale and hollow. Vance and Kim were across the hall with a team of 3 attorneys. The air smelled of old wood and anxiety. Maria knelt in front of Chloe. "Remember the game, sweetie? The question game? We're going to play it in the big room. You ask Ash your questions, okay?" She had taught Chloe to call him Ash, the nickname his childhood friends used, something she'd overheard years ago. A familiar sound. Chloe nodded, clutching her stuffed cat. "Okay, Mama." The hearing began. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Grayson, had a reputation for being impatient with theatrics. Vance's lead attorney, a man named Crawford, presented the petition. He outlined the medical reports, the affidavits about Elia's confusion, the grave risk to the company. He called the hired neuropsychologist to the stand, who stated that Elias was unable to consistently recall events from the past week, let alone make complex business decisions. Then it was Anya's turn. She stood. "Your Honor, the medical evidence is not in dispute. Mr. Thorne has severe amnesia, but the question isn't just what he's forgotten, it's what remains. We ask for a brief demonstration." Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. "A demonstration?" "Of a different form of memory assessment," Anya said. "One that accounts for emotional and procedural memory, which often survives when declarative memory fails." Crawford objected. "This is a courtroom, not a therapy session." Judge Grayson looked at Elias, who sat perfectly still, then at Chloe on Maria's lap. "I'll allow 5 minutes. Proceed." Anya nodded to Maria. Maria set Chloe down. The little girl, in her pink ruffled shirt, walked across the quiet courtroom until she stood in front of Elias' table. She held up her stuffed cat. "Ash, where does Mr. Whiskers sleep?" The room held its breath. Elias looked at the toy. He blinked. Then slowly he said, "In the blue chair, the one by the window, he likes the sun." His voice was unsure, but the sentence was complete. Chloe beamed. "Yes," she turned to the judge. "He remembers." A murmur went through the room. Maria's heart hammered. She had planted that question. The blue chair was in Elias' penthouse study. Chloe had left her toy there once. It was a test of routine, not business. Crawford stood, a parlor trick, a rehearsed line about a child's toy. But Anya wasn't done. "One more, Your Honor." She approached Chloe and whispered. Chloe turned back to Elias, her small face serious. "Ash, what song do you sing when the big light goes off?" Elias' brow furrowed. The question seemed nonsensical. He stared at Chloe. The silence stretched. Vance shifted in his seat, a faint smile on his lips. Then Elias' eyes changed. He looked past Chloe into the middle distance, and very softly he began to hum. It was a tuneless, rhythmic series of notes, 3 short, 2 long. Chloe immediately clapped her hands. The elevator song. Anya turned to the judge. For 3 years, Mr. Thorne took the private elevator to his penthouse. It has a distinct chime, 3 short, 2 long. He would hum it back, a game he played with my client's daughter when she visited. That is a procedural memory embedded in routine and emotion. It is not in any medical file. It is not something a stranger could rehearse with him in his current state. The pivot was instantaneous. The courtroom dynamic shifted from a clinical evaluation to a human puzzle. Judge Grayson leaned forward. "Counselor, where are you going with this?" "We are establishing that Mr. Thorne's memory is not universally erased. It is context-dependent. The context his partners provide, stress, pressure, complex financial terms, induces shutdown, but familiar, non-threatening cues can access intact neural pathways. This has direct bearing on the conservatorship. If his capacity is being assessed solely in a context that guarantees failure, the assessment is flawed." Crawford was furious. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The fate of a publicly traded company cannot hinge on whether a man remembers a nursery rhyme." "It's not a nursery rhyme," a new voice said. It was Elia's. He was looking at his hands, then up at the judge. It's the access code." The room went dead silent. Elias continued, his words coming faster as if chasing a thought. "3 short, 2 long, the chime. It's the same pattern for the secondary server vault. In the old office, the one we used before the move." He looked at Vance and Kim. His expression was no longer blank. It was sharp, accusatory. "You both hated it. You said it was childish. But I said it was easy to remember, for emergencies." Vance's face drained of color. Kim looked down at the table. Anya seized the moment. "Your Honor, we request a recess to verify this claim. If Mr. Thorne can recall a secure access pattern known only to the founders, it fundamentally changes the medical picture." Judge Grayson slammed her gavel. "We will recess for 1 hour. Mr. Crawford, you will arrange for a secure, independent verification of this server vault and its access code. Court is adjourned." The chaos was immediate. Reporters scrambled. Vance's team huddled in a panicked whisper. Maria rushed to Elias, but he was surrounded by court officers. He looked at her over their shoulders, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning clarity. He had remembered something real, something material, and it had come through a door opened by a 3-year-old. In the hallway, Crawford cornered Anya. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. That vault hasn't been used in 4 years. If he's right." "If he's right," Anya finished, "then your entire petition is built on the assumption of total incapacity, and that assumption is now broken." Meanwhile, in a private room, Maria held Chloe. The little girl was oblivious, coloring on a legal pad, but Maria was trembling. The plan had worked too well. They had wanted to show a glimmer, a possibility. Instead, they had struck a vein of corporate gold, and gold attracts thieves. Within 20 minutes, the story was on financial news wires. Ether founders' bizarre courtroom memory breakthrough. The stock, which had been rising on the prospect of a sale, suddenly became volatile. Who was in charge? What else did Elias remember? The verification team, composed of a court-appointed tech expert and a representative from each legal side, drove to Ether's old downtown data center. The vault was a physical hardened server room behind a biometric lock and a keypad. The expert input the code, 3 short presses, 2 long presses, on the number 5 key. A green light flashed. The heavy door hissed open. Inside, on an isolated server, they found something no one expected. Not corporate documents. A digital journal. Elias Thorne's personal, encrypted logs from the founding days up to about 18 months ago. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before the crash. The subject line, Vance/Kim Pressure Ray, Sale, recording all meetings. They are not what they seem. The tech expert called the judge. The hearing was reconvened in an emergency session that evening. The mood was now deadly serious. Judge Grayson addressed the room. "The access code has been verified. Furthermore, the vault contained materials that may be relevant to these proceedings. I am ordering a full forensic review. Pending that review, I am suspending the conservatorship hearing for 48 hours. Mr. Thorne will remain in the hospital under medical supervision. Contact between Mr. Thorne and the petitioners, Vance and Kim, is hereby suspended." It was a temporary victory. But as Maria left the courthouse that night, a black sedan pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. It was Robert Vance. He wasn't smiling. "You think you're helping him?" he said, his voice low and even. "You're signing his death warrant. That man in there isn't Elias Thorne. He's a liability, and liabilities get removed." The window rolled up, and the car slid away into the dark. Maria stood on the curb, Chloe asleep on her shoulder, the cold city wind cutting through her coat. The game had changed. It was no longer about memory. It was about survival. And the only map they had was in the mind of a man who couldn't remember, guided by the heart of a child who didn't understand the danger. Back at the hospital, security was tripled. The threat from Vance wasn't just a threat, it was a confession. The journal from the vault was now in the hands of a forensic IT team appointed by the court. And what they found in the first 24 hours didn't just suggest betrayal, it outlined a blueprint for it. The journal entries were audio logs, transcribed by voice recognition software. Elias had been secretly recording his board meetings for over a year. The logs revealed a pattern of deliberate obstruction. Vance and Kim had been funneling company funds through a series of offshore shell companies, skimming millions to create a slush fund. They used this fund to secretly buy up a critical block of shares from ailing early investors, amassing enough voting power to force a sale against Elias' will. The last log was the most damning. It captured a meeting 2 weeks before the crash. Vance's voice, cold and clear. "Elias, the board is turning, the vote is coming. You can go along with the sale and walk away a very rich man, or you can be removed for cause. We've built the case. Your ethical objections look like instability to the right people." Elias had responded, "I built this company to last, not to be stripped for parts, and I know about the Malta accounts." The recording ended with the sound of a chair scraping back and Kim saying, "You have no idea what you're playing with." This changed everything. The conservatorship hearing was no longer about capacity, it was about motive. Why were Vance and Kim so desperate to gain control of a man they claimed was incompetent? Because he was the only one who knew where the bodies were buried, and now he couldn't remember. Anya presented the findings to Judge Grayson in a closed-door session. The judge's response was to issue a temporary restraining order, freezing the offshore accounts and barring Vance and Kim from any company transactions. It was a legal victory, but a fragile one. Without Elias' coherent testimony, the evidence was circumstantial. The recordings were powerful, but Vance's attorneys were already arguing they were selectively edited and taken out of context. They needed Elias to remember the context. Maria, now under police protection at a safe house, became the de facto memory therapist. With guidance from a neurologist Anya consulted, she created a Q protocol. She filled a bag with items from Elias' penthouse, his favorite leather-bound notebook, a specific brand of pen, the blue throw blanket from his couch, even the brand of coffee he drank. The theory was sensory memory. Smell, touch, and taste are hardwired to the hippocampus, often bypassing the damaged prefrontal cortex. She brought these items to the hospital one by one. She would place the notebook in his hands, let him smell the coffee beans. Chloe was the constant, the emotional anchor. The process was agonizingly slow. Some days he would stare at an object for an hour and nothing would happen. Other days, a scent would trigger a visceral reaction, a wave of nausea, a sudden headache, but no clear memory. Then, on the third day, she brought the blue blanket. Elias was sitting by the window. He took it, pressed it to his face, and inhaled. His body went rigid. "Claire," he whispered. Maria froze. Claire was the name of his former fiancée, the one who had left. "What about Claire?" she asked gently. He didn't answer for a full minute. Then, in a flat, haunted voice, he said, "She didn't leave. She was paid to leave." The revelation was an earthquake. Maria immediately called Anya. With the safe house landline, they contacted the private investigator Anya had quietly hired. His name was Arlo. He had 48 hours to find Claire. Meanwhile, Vance and Kim were not idle. With their assets frozen and their reputations unraveling, they launched a counterattack in the court of public opinion. They gave an interview to a major financial network. Sitting side by side, they presented themselves as concerned stewards, victims of a tragic situation. "We love Elias like a brother," Vance said, his eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "But the man in that hospital bed is not the Elias we know. He's confused, susceptible to manipulation by those who see a financial opportunity in his vulnerability. They pointedly mentioned a member of the domestic staff who had inserted herself into the legal process. They didn't name Maria, but the implication was clear. A gold-digging housekeeper was exploiting a brain-damaged billionaire. The story trended online. Maria's name and photos, dug up from her sparse social media, were splashed across gossip sites. Comment sections filled with vile accusations. The pressure was designed to make her quit, to break her. It almost worked. Sitting in the safe house, reading the comments, Maria felt a shame so deep it choked her. But then she looked at Chloe, playing on the floor, and at the plastic ring she still wore on a string around her neck, the mate to the one on Elia's finger. She thought of the man in the hospital, fighting to remember his own life. She deleted the apps from her phone. She didn't quit. Arlo found Claire in Portland, Oregon. She was living under her maiden name, working as a graphic designer. She was hesitant to talk, terrified. But when Arlo played her the snippet of the journal audio where Elias said she was paid to leave, she broke down. She agreed to a sealed deposition. 2 days later, in a lawyer's office in Portland, Claire told her story. She and Elias had been engaged. She was an artist, not a business person. Vance had approached her a year and a half ago. He showed her fabricated evidence, bank records, photos, suggesting Elias was involved in insider trading and was under federal investigation. He told her that if she stayed, she would be dragged through the mud, her family ruined. He then offered her a choice: a clean, quiet break with a $2 million severance package, or financial and legal annihilation. She took the money and left, leaving a note saying she'd fallen out of love. She had been living in fear and regret ever since. This was the cause Vance had threatened to use against Elias. They had manufactured a scandal to force out the one person who could keep Elias emotionally grounded, making him more isolated, more vulnerable to their pressure. It was psychological warfare. The deposition was sent to Judge Grayson. The web was tightening, but Vance and Kim had one last, desperate card to play. They filed an emergency motion with the court, alleging that the so-called memory recovery was a fraud. They presented a sworn statement from a new expert witness, a psychiatrist who had never met Elias but opined, based on records, that his sudden, context-specific memories were highly consistent with confabulation, a condition where the brain invents false memories to fill gaps. They argued Elias was not recovering. He was being programmed, fed information by Maria and Anya to create a narrative that would invalidate the conservatorship. They demanded an independent, inpatient psychiatric evaluation to take place at a secure facility they selected. It was a move to get him out of the hospital and into a controlled environment where they could influence the doctors. The motion was dangerous, it was plausible, and it created a deadline. The judge would rule on the motion in 48 hours. In the hospital, the pressure was taking a toll. Elias was having nightmares, waking up screaming about red brake lights and the smell of burnt rubber. The medical team was concerned about regression. Maria knew they were running out of time. They needed a memory that was unassailable, a piece of information that was so specific, so obscure, that no one could have fed it to him. It had to come entirely from the depths of his own mind. She sat with him, Chloe on her lap. "Think about the office," she urged. "The old office, the one with the vault. What else was there? What did you keep there that mattered only to you?" Elias rubbed his temples, his face a mask of frustration. "I don't, it's just a room, metal, cold." Chloe, bored of the adults talking, squirmed down and started playing with the stuffed cat and the plastic ring. She put the ring on the cat's paw. "Mr. Whiskers is a prince," she announced. Elias watched her. He stared at the ring, the cheap, colorful plastic. His eyes lost focus. He began to speak, but it wasn't to them. It was a monologue, a memory playing out loud. And the injection molding machine was overheating. The prototype was too brittle. "We were out of time. I took the sample home, a pink one. I left it on the kitchen counter," he blinked, coming back to the present. He looked at Maria, his eyes clear for the first time. "The ring, it's not a toy. It's a prototype for the first product Ether ever manufactured. A biodegradable security token for kids. It failed. We never launched it. I kept one as a reminder." Maria's blood ran cold. She understood immediately. If this was true, it was a memory from the earliest days of Ether, known only to Elias and perhaps his original engineers. It was a memory that predated Vance and Kim. It was a memory that proved his identity was intact at its core. She called Anya. We need to find an old engineer, someone who was there at the very beginning. Anya worked through the night. She tracked down a man named Leo Matheson, Ether's first head of product, who had left the company after falling out with Vance 5 years ago. He was living in Vermont. When Anya described the pink plastic ring, Leo laughed in disbelief. The dandelion ring? Yeah, I remember. It was a stupid idea. Elias insisted. He had this whole thing about teaching kids about data privacy through a toy. The mold kept breaking. We made about 20 prototypes. He kept the last one, said it was his failure trophy. Why? Anya didn't explain. She had him sign an affidavit on the spot, describing the prototype in precise technical detail. She filed it with the court at dawn, alongside a request for immediate dismissal of the motion for psychiatric evaluation. The evidence was now a stack: the journal, Claire's deposition, and now corroboration of a deep, personal memory. The judge called a final hearing for 9 a.m. the next morning. It was not to rule on the conservatorship. It was to hear arguments on whether Vance and Kim should be held in contempt and referred for criminal investigation. As Maria prepared to leave for the courthouse, she looked at Elias. He was dressed, alert, holding the plastic ring. I remember the machine, he said softly. I remember the smell of the plastic. I remember being so sure it would work. He looked at her. I don't remember everything, but I remember enough to know who I am, and I know who they are. Maria nodded. This was it. The end of the second act, not with a memory fully restored, but with a spine of steel reforged. The man who walked into that courtroom would not be a blank slate. He would be a witness, and he would have a 3-year-old girl and her mother to thank for it. The final battle for his life and his company was about to begin. The final hearing was not in a courtroom. Judge Grayson ordered it held in the hospital's rehabilitation gym. Her reasoning was simple. If the issue was Mr. Thorne's capacity, then let the assessment happen in the environment where he was reclaiming it. The room was arranged like an informal round table. Elias sat at one end, Maria and Chloe beside him. Anya and a neurologist, Dr. Evans, were on his other side. Across from them sat Vance, Kim, and their lawyer Crawford, looking out of place in their tailored suits against the backdrop of parallel bars and exercise mats. Judge Grayson sat at the head, a court reporter beside her. The judge spoke first. This is not an adversarial proceeding. It is a fact-finding inquiry. Mr. Thorne, you are not on trial. The court seeks to understand the current state of your memory and judgment with the evidence presented. Let's begin with the prototype. She held up the pink plastic ring. Mr. Thorne, can you tell me what this is, in your own words? Elias took a breath. He looked at the ring, then at Chloe, who gave him a small, serious nod. It's the dandelion ring prototype, the first product Ether ever attempted. It was a physical token for a digital identity vault for children. The idea was that a child could own their data from the start. It failed because we couldn't solve the material science. The plastic was either too brittle or too soft. We scrapped the project. I kept one of the last samples. As a reminder that good intentions aren't enough, you need good engineering. His voice was steady, precise. It was the voice of a CEO explaining a product failure, not an amnesic patient guessing. Judge Grayson nodded. She then read from the affidavit of Leo Matheson, the former head of product. The details matched exactly, down to the overheating injection molding machine. She looked at Vance and Kim. Do either of you dispute this account? Vance shifted. It was a long time ago, Your Honor. I don't recall the specifics. But you were a founder. Were you not involved in product decisions? Of course, but you don't recall this prototype that your CEO kept as a failure trophy for years? The judge's tone was dry. The point was made. This was a memory so specific and so personally significant that it could not have been implanted in a suggestible mind in a matter of weeks. The hearing progressed through the evidence, the journal, the recordings, Claire's deposition. Each time Elias was asked if he remembered the context, his answers were not perfect. He couldn't recall the exact date of the recorded meeting. He couldn't remember the name of the restaurant where Vance had first approached Claire, but he remembered the essence, the emotional truth. He remembered feeling betrayed. He remembered the pressure. He remembered his own resolve to document everything. Dr. Evans explained to the judge that this pattern, emotional and procedural memory returning before specific episodic details, was textbook for his type of injury. Then Crawford stood for cross-examination. He approached slowly, a predator circling. "Mr. Thorne, you've recalled a toy and a feeling, but do you recall the quarterly earnings report from the third quarter of last year? Do you recall the terms of the proposed merger with Synergetics?" Elias met his gaze. "No, I don't." Crawford allowed a small smile. "So, you cannot perform the core functions of your role. You cannot make a multi-billion-dollar decision because you remember a plastic ring." Before Elias could answer, a small voice piped up. "He remembers me." All eyes turned to Chloe. She was standing on her chair, holding her stuffed cat. "He remembers Mr. Whiskers sleeps in the blue chair. He remembers the elevator song. He remembers I don't like the green beans in the cafeteria." She looked at Crawford, utterly fearless. "That's more important." The room was stunned into silence. The absurd, profound truth of a child had sliced through the legal rhetoric. Remembering a person, a consistent kindness, was a different form of capacity. It was the capacity for trust. And without that, no business decision matters. Judge Grayson leaned back, a faint, unreadable smile on her lips. She had seen enough. She delivered her ruling from her seat without leaving the room. She denied the petition for conservatorship in its entirety. She found that while Elias Thorne still had significant memory gaps, he possessed a clear and demonstrable core identity, intact judgment, and the ability to discern trustworthiness, a competency that, in the court's view, has been shockingly absent in some of the other parties present. She then referred the evidence against Vance and Kim to the district attorney for investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She ordered them to immediately vacate their board positions and place their frozen shares under the control of a court-appointed trustee. It was over just like that. The fallout was swift and public. Vance and Kim were arrested the following week. The story dominated the news cycle: the billionaire who forgot everything, the housekeeper and her toddler, the treacherous partners. Ether's stock, after a period of volatility, stabilized and then began to climb. The market liked a clear villain and a redeemed hero. But what happened next is where the real story lies. Elias did not return to his old life. He could not. The penthouse felt like a museum. The office felt like a battlefield. He sold the penthouse and moved into a smaller, sun-filled home with a garden. He returned to work at Ether, but not as its omnipotent CEO. He restructured the leadership, promoting a team of engineers who had been loyal to the original mission. He became the chief visionary officer, focusing on the long-term projects he loved, like secure healthcare data, and left the day-to-day operations to others. He told the board, "I had to forget who I was to remember why I started." He offered Maria a job, not as a housekeeper, as the director of environmental design. Her role was to ensure every Ether office and workspace felt human, warm, and conducive to calm focus, the opposite of the cold, pressure cooker environment that had allowed the betrayal to fester. He tripled her salary. She accepted, on one condition, that the company implement an on-site, high-quality childcare center for employees. He agreed. It was the first facility of its kind in the tech sector, and it was named the Chloe Center. Maria and Chloe moved out of the apartment with the sprung sofa. They bought a small house with a yard. The plastic rings, both of them, were framed and hung in the entryway. Elias and Maria did not become a romantic couple. That would have been a predictable Hollywood ending. Instead, they became family, the kind that is chosen. He became Uncle Ash to Chloe. He attended her preschool plays. She helped him plant a vegetable garden in his new backyard, getting dirt everywhere. He continued therapy, and his memory recovery was gradual. Some things never came back. But the memories that did return were often the simple ones: the smell of rain on concrete, the taste of a specific brand of apple juice, the feeling of triumph when he finally beat Chloe at a game of Candyland. There is a final detail, one that emerged a year later. During the renovation of the old Ether data center, workers found a time capsule behind a wall panel. It had been placed there during the company's first year. Inside was a collection of items from the original staff, a napkin with a sketch of the logo, a USB drive with early code, a photo of the team. And there, at the bottom, was another pink plastic dandelion ring prototype. Taped to it was a note in Elia's handwriting from 15 years ago. It read, "For the future guardian, if you find this, remember, the product failed, but the purpose remains. Protect the data of the small and the young. They are the only future that matters." Elias had no memory of writing that note, but when he read it, he didn't need to. The man he was now agreed with the man he had been then. The circle was complete. The story of Elias Thorne is not a story about a man who got his memory back. It's about a man who, when everything was taken, discovered that his identity wasn't stored in board meetings or bank accounts. It was reinforced in the quiet, repetitive, honest interactions that his brain, in its wisdom, protected above all else. It was encoded in the trust of a little girl who saw a sad man and gave him a cereal toy ring. The law calls it competency, medicine calls it memory, but in the end, what saved him was something much simpler and much more powerful. It was the one thing that no one could manipulate, no one could steal, and no accident could erase: the human capacity to connect. And sometimes, that connection looks like a 3-year-old in a pink shirt, holding your hand and leading you back home. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a tale of corporate intrigue, but a question about where we store our own identities. We live in a world that prizes the grand narrative, the big achievements, the public victories, the stock price, the title. We build monuments to those moments. But what the science of memory and the story of Elias Thorne reveal is that our core self isn't held in those monuments. It's reinforced in the tiny, repetitive, often unnoticed interactions of our daily lives. The way a barista remembers your order, the inside joke with a coworker, the bedtime ritual with a child. These are the neural pathways that prove, day after day, who you are to yourself. When everything else is stripped away, the money, the power, the memory of your own name, what remains is the echo of how you made others feel and how they made you feel in return. That echo is remarkably durable. It is, perhaps, the most secure backup system we possess. This channel exists for stories like this one. Stories that remind us that the most powerful forces in human experience are not complex algorithms or legal contracts, but simple presence. The courage to show up, the willingness to see someone, truly see them, even when they are lost to themselves. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when a small kindness anchored you, or when you were that anchor for someone else, then you understand why we do this. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, because we are just getting started. We have so many more stories of quiet courage, of unexpected connections, of the moments that change everything without making a sound. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a time someone remembered you when you felt forgotten, or share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. We don't shout here, we don't chase the loudest headline, we listen for the stories that whisper the deepest truths, and we save a seat at the table for everyone who wants to listen with us. Thank you for watching, thank you for being part of this. We'll see you in the next story.